I am all in on the Sacramento Kings making Keon Ellis a permanent starter, even if head coach Mike Brown isn't quite there yet. Brenden Nunes of the Kings Pulse podcast and SacTown Sports 1140 joins me on today's show to discuss Keon starting and the Kings simplifying things on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball and how that's led to their recent success. It's all right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time. Time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News, and I've had the privilege of getting to know Brenden Nunes over the past handful of seasons that he's begun covering the Sacramento Kings. Brenden is a unbelievably bright basketball mind, has a great feel for what the Kings are doing, and has become a good friend too, just talking hoops, playing video games together, and trying to figure out this Kings team as best as we possibly can. So I thought, who better to have on to talk about what's been going on? Brenden has a great mind for X's and O's, so we're going to get into the weeds a little bit about what the Kings are doing strategically on the floor and what they did over those back-to-back wins against the Bucks and the Lakers, and how they can hopefully carry that into the remainder of the season. Plus, the very end, we even have a conversation about Malik Monk and his Kings future. A lot of great stuff, so I hope you enjoy right here on Locked On Kings. I'm lucky enough to have stolen a man of many podcasts, Brenden Nunes of Kings Pulse, Kings Beat, Return of the Roar. Of course, you cover the Sacramento Kings for SacTown Sports 1140. Fresh off of Kings practice, I got you here in the ABC 10 studios to talk a little bit because we have a 2-day lull in between a really good back-to-back for Sacramento and then a big game against the Knicks on Saturday. But like I said, you just came from Kings practice at the Golden One Center. Anything of interest, anything of value that we should know about?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. You're just a little nicer than me. I'll try to keep up next time.
It's TV.
But,
it's TV. I miss these days.
Yeah.
I was just getting up and wearing what I want to wear.
This wasn't the plan, so I could have dressed a little nicer, but thanks for having me.
You look great.
Kings practice, there was, first of all, injury updates. Malik Monk, fine, strained his neck in that middle of that last game, ended up playing through it. He was fine, full participant today. Keegan Murray, full participant after that ankle injury, and Kevin Huerter was a full participant as well. He said that, the 2 days really did him a favor here, that maybe if it was just one day, he would have been unsure, but he's feeling good and optimistic going into the Knicks game. Trey Lyles did not participate. And same with Sasha Vezenkov, who's been out for a little while here. Trey Lyles did, after practice concluded, went out there, got some shots up by himself, but he's not even elevating off the floor. It's all, ground-based, and it was very quick that he was out there, sleeve on his leg. So I'm, not expecting Trey to be out there tomorrow, but that's pretty much the extent of it. I thought there was some good stuff from Kevin Huerter. We got Kevin Huerter, Keegan Murray, and Coach, obviously. But Deuce Mason asked him about, are you getting better at dealing with slumps mentally? And I thought Kevin was very transparent with saying that, there were some moments earlier in the year that maybe he didn't handle that the best, and it's still a work in progress.
I think Kevin's gone through a roller coaster of a season, not just with his consistency issues, but I have to imagine mentally too, going back to being replaced by Chris Duarte during training camp, and then he was replaced by Chris Duarte again over the course of the season, and now he's probably not going to like, if he ever hears this, he's not going to like what I have to say, because I'm firmly in the camp of, I think Keon Ellis should be the starter for this Kings team. I've seen enough to the impact that he's made. But Mike Brown has made it pretty much clear that if Kevin Huerter's good to go, that Kevin Huerter's going to start. I understand that. I'm not going to throw necessarily a fit about it, even if I disagree with it. But where are you at with that? Do you think if Kevin's back, keep him in there, keep it how it's been basically the last 2 years, or not? Keon's done enough. Let's see it full time.
Yeah, I've been a little surprised by Keon. I'm a big Keon guy. I was at the time of the draft and throughout the course of last year. But I've been surprised these last 2 games how poised he looks. He looks like a vet out there at times. And there's still little stuff that's a learning curve of, maybe being a little handsy with Dame, and he's going to get you on some baiting fouls sort of thing. So there's still some learning curves, but I think he's been really poised on both ends of the floor. He's a good three-point shooter. I think he's legitimately a very good three-point shooter. He was upwards of 40% in the G League last year, successful with that at Alabama. I think he's shown that during his handful of games with Sacramento this year. But I have been a little surprised. I mean, you asked Coach pretty transparently the idea of, will you play with the idea of putting Keegan in that starting lineup? And he was very blunt in saying no.
Yep.
And I think there's an aspect of, it's the same thing he says with Malik pretty much, that we like what we have with that starting group, and if we feel like we need to mess with it throughout the course of the game, we can bring some of these bench pieces in and alter it. So he thinks, we can still get Keon to 20, 25 minutes a night if that game justifies that sort of minute load for him. And I think with Kevin, like we're talking about, there is a mental aspect of this for sure, and I think that you don't want to mess with that too much. I do think that starting unit is been pretty successful for the Kings, and there have been the defensive questions with Kevin, but offensively, I think people, it's easy to overlook while focusing on these flaws, which is understandable, but he's a damn near perfect offensive fit, complementary piece with Fox and Sabonis. Moves really well, spaces the floor, shoots well. Even when the shot's not going down, he still has that respect from defenses and is still going to be guarded and provide that spacing. And I do think there's an aspect here if you don't want to mess with his head more.
I understand that, and I think, the consistent Locked On Kings listeners are going to call me a bit of a turncoat here, because earlier on in the season, when there were questions about Duarte replacing Kevin, I was fully on the stick with Kevin, ride with Kevin. I agree with you. I think on paper, offensively, there is not much of a better fit, especially with Mike getting back to the Kings playing the way they want to play, which is paint touches and spray threes. In theory, spraying the ball to an open Kevin Huerter is one of the best options that you can have with this Kings offense. So I understand that completely. I think where I'm having issues with Mike right now is with his inconsistencies, because he's tried this before already this season. He's tried to move Kevin out of the starting lineup and plug in Duarte. It didn't work, so he went back to Kevin. We haven't seen him try Keon in place of Kevin when Kevin's healthy. Right. It was a necessity. Every single time Keon has started, it's been out of necessity. For full transparency, if he were to be the full-time starter for the remainder of the season, I know the Kings aren't going undefeated. In fact, they could lose to the Knicks, and suddenly that perfect record is gone. That's fine. That record doesn't mean too much to me. What I'm seeing from Keon is he is delivering, and more importantly, the Kings are starting games consistently with Keon the way that Mike Brown has been preaching he wants this team to play consistently. Keon is giving you, or is a big part of the Kings giving you what you've wanted.
Right.
Now you're hesitant. Maybe it's because it's so much later in the season. Now you're hesitant to move Kevin Huerter out when you've already tried to do it before. That inconsistency just, it's hard for me to get past that. I understand it. Don't want to mess with Kevin's confidence, of course. And like I said, Kevin's been through it this season. But if this is the type of basketball you've wanted to play all season, now you're getting it. With the playoffs right around the corner, this is when you want to ramp up. Stick with it, I think, is where I'm at.
Yeah, and I think that's understandable. I think that the part you said in there that stood out to me, though, that I agree with is that it is very late in the season. Yeah. And that's what makes it, I think, potentially a little tough. And the other thing I'll add with Kevin is the spacing that we talked about is more valuable with De'Aaron and Domas on the floor, because those guys are able to find him. If you're talking a bench unit where a lot of times Kevin's coming out of the game and De'Aaron at the same time, and you're rolling with Davion, Malik, and Fox, or Davion, Malik, and Keon for a little while in these last few games, and it's like, I guess that could be Keon, but Davion's not as good at setting up Kevin as De'Aaron would be. I think that he is more beneficial alongside the starters than he could be alongside reserves, and maybe that's a cop-out here, but I do think it being later in the season plays a part here. And I'm still unsure that, like I said, Keon looks poised. He looks like a vet. I'm not convinced that there won't be lulls in Keon's performance, whether it be those fouls where, he has three steals in this last game. I think he also had 4 fouls as well in his minutes out there. And also offensively, like, bringing the ball up the floor can be a little bit of a question. Sometimes we've seen that earlier in the year. So I'm not convinced there won't be some ups and downs still with Keon as we go here, but he could continue to prove me wrong.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you can watch the winnings roll in. It is demon and goblin time at Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Like I mentioned, the demons are a little more difficult, a little more scary, harder to hit, but if that happens, you can really make some money. The goblins, a little bit easier for lesser payouts, but still a good chance for you to ultimately hit 4, 5, or 6 of 6 to really cash in on those paydays. Prize Picks is really simple to play. You can make picks and selections just minutes or even 60 seconds before a game begins and get it in time. They offer also quick withdrawals. So when you make money, you will get that money into your bank account very, very quickly. No hoops or crazy things. It's completely safe, and I can vouch for that. I've had some winnings on Prize Picks and been able to get them into my account very, very quickly. Prize Picks are it's just so much fun to play. It's a just new and different way to approach watching and following basketball or following football, baseball, whatever it may be. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
I've really appreciated over the last 2 years of Mike Brown being here that he is open to your disagreeing with him, not you, but our disagreeing with him and asking him about that, and he'll give his explanations, and he'll always follow it up with, you can criticize, or if it's wrong, I'll happily take the blame, but this is the way I think to do it. And look, Mike is far more justified or far more validated as a basketball tactician than I am, so trust him over trusting me, certainly. I've really enjoyed over the last couple of years watching your relationship with Mike as well, because you did this on King's Pulse a lot, and do this on King's Pulse a lot. You have a very kind of X's and O's, what's happening, like on the clipboard to the floor, and in film sessions to the floor, and you ask Mike and talk with Mike a lot. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is he seems to have really discovered something in the month of March, really since the All-Star break, which is 3 guard lineups. Any combination of Fox, of Monk, sometimes Kevin Huerter, but also getting impact out of Keon and Davion off the bench at the same time. From like an X's and O's standpoint, the conversations you've had with Mike, just what you're seeing with your basketball eye, what is it about that 3 guard lineup and the different combinations of undersized guards that's working?
Yeah, I think defensively specifically, you roll those 3 guys out, or any combination of the 3 that you mentioned. And it's funny, like, Kevin should qualify for 3 guard lineups, but honestly, when I talk about 3 guard lineups, I typically don't include him.
The same way.
He's 6'7".
It's like a 3.
Like more of like a wing,
Yeah,
I guess,
I agree.
which is maybe, I mean, he's a shooting guard in a way, but I technically don't quite put him in there. But yeah, if we're talking about any combination of the other 4, Fox, Davion, Malik, and Keon, I think that between those 3 that are out there, defensively, it does give you some switchability. All of those guys are very similar sized, and they all fight, and they play defense differently, all of them. You know, Fox is a good combination of physical and handsy, but also, you know, he can't do that all game long, is just the realistic standpoint of where he's at now. I think eventually he will be able to work closer to that point, but right now it's kind of flip a switch. Are you going to get De'Aaron totally locked in, or is he going to be a little bit more lackadaisical defensively, which is why it's valuable to have, in my mind, Davion and Keon out there with him. And Davion's a very physical defender. Keon is more active hands. And so there's different styles, and best players, you want to keep them on their toes, switch up who's out there. I think defensively it helps with the switching a lot in the perimeter defense. You know, there's guys are going to get past players. It's just how it works, but make them change directions one time. Make it not a just straight line drive, which I think we've seen throughout the course of this year. And offensively is probably the biggest surprise, and I think why they've been able to get away in a way with this lineup recently is that Davion's shooting the ball extremely well. He's above 40% from the corners so far this year on not great volume, but it's a credit to him. I feel like his shots looked better recently.
Much better.
And we mentioned Keon being a really good shooter as well, and I think that the other aspect of Davion has been, it really feels like since that Minnesota game where De'Aaron was out, where they told Davion, we need you to be more aggressive offensively. And he's so fast, man.
Very quick.
Like very, very quick with the ball. I remember Jerry Reynolds, when Davion got drafted, loved him because he was like, he can stay in front of you and you can't stay in front of him. And there is value in that. And I think he's been more aggressive and decisive. There's so much talk about these spray threes. And it's not just, Fox or Malik breaking their guy off the dribble and then spraying out. It's if that gets kicked out to a shooter, attack the closeout and then make another play from there. And I think having those multiple guards out there helps you do that.
Building off that too, like with those lineups, specifically with Keon and Davion, you can have them both on the floor at the same time, which we've seen, but plugging one of those guys in, we're still talking about one guy out of 5. So even if, like Davion the other night against Los Angeles, didn't have a great scoring night. Mike Brown praised him a ton for what you just talked about, which is the spray threes, but it's not like Davion was shooting the ball and scoring at the rate that he has been. But you're putting him out there with a Malik or a Fox. Sabonis is probably still out there to some extent. You have shooters, Harrison Barnes, you have Keegan Murray. So what I like about these 3-guard lineups too is he's staggering them with your wings and your bigs that are still such a fundamental, impactful part of your scoring game that even if Davion's not going to do all the scoring all the time, it's not like how it felt like at times where if Davion was on the floor and he wasn't scoring, you're getting nothing out of him. Now, Davion's on the floor. Sometimes he's scoring. Maybe he's not, but he's surrounded by other offensive players to where it's not so detrimental to Sacramento if he specifically is not scoring or he's specifically not a scoring threat. That's what I think Mike has done a really good job of. He has his rotations and he sticks to them. It still blows my mind that De'Aaron Fox is the first guy subbed out for the Kings every single game, or almost every single game. That seems so weird to sub your star out first, but that's been Mike's rotation. He stuck to it pretty much over 2 years. A lot of that is because of how he sets himself up on the back end towards the end of games for fourth quarter Fox. But for Mike to continue with these rotations but have found a way to stagger in these guards that aren't necessarily known for offense but might be able to give you some, I think it's a credit to him. He's unlocked something, and I'm glad he's figuring it out with enough time to workshop it before we get to the postseason.
Yeah, Domas's playmaking is great, but I think it's different and a little more valuable in a way. I guess it's important to have both, but a guard playmaker, a guy that can, again, break his guy down on the perimeter and sort of collapse the defense from there and make plays. Now, Domas has his ways of doing it, but I think it's important to have a guard out there as well. And, you see Domas's two-man chemistry with nearly everybody on the team, but really the guys that are good playmakers specifically. And I think part of subbing Fox out quickly is it helps that Malik goes back in at that same time, and then you get to stagger Fox and Sabonis, and typically you want another playmaker out there with those guys, as we're talking about. So the moments that Sabonis is not, it is helpful to have a Davion, have a Keon. Now, I still think that you could do better playmaking-wise if we're talking long-term roster construction. I think it's, it's the reality for this season, and they're in a fine spot in that aspect. But I do think that those guys give you a bit more when it comes to playmaking and, 1-2 dribbles and trying to keep it swinging. But I don't necessarily say that that's a strength of theirs either. It just is compared to the other options.
I agree, and it feels less tunnel vision too, to where when it was the Golden State Warriors, they knew it was either Sabonis, Fox, or Malik that were going to initiate, and very rarely are all three of them on the floor at the same time. One of them, I think, has to be on the floor at all times. Typically, you'll get a combination of two of them, and you would see the Warriors hyper-focus on not allowing Sabonis to initiate the offense with the dribble handoff game, or they tried to limit Malik Monk getting downhill. With the addition now of just a little extra playmaking from a Keon, or specifically a Davion that we've been seeing as of late, even if 1 out of every 3 or 4 possessions you can take some of the pressure off of the main playmakers and give the defense something different to look at, keep them guessing a little bit. It's amazing how something that you'd think is that small, Davion's not coming in and taking over the offense, but just adding that element can open up so much just by having a little variety.
Yeah, I think it's decisiveness. It's one of those main guys, Malik, De'Aaron, or Domas, is going to create an initial advantage. It's about maintaining that advantage. Trey Lyles, when he first got brought to the Kings, one of his big knocks was the pump fakes. Right? And now it's a decisiveness. It's, okay, if I do take that pump, I'm going to go right after, or I'm just going to shoot it instantly and not hesitate, or just drive right away and maintain that advantage. And I think those guards are really good at that. And again, long term, I actually think this is a big potential development in swing skill for Keegan. I think it's important that he gets to the point where, we see him taking 1-2 dribbles and kind of taking that mid-range, but doing that and then spraying out to shooters like they clearly emphasize, I think is, you've seen little flashes here and there, but it's definitely still flashes right now. And I think long term, since the core really in my mind is Fox, Murray, and Sabonis, and Malik kind of on the fringe of that. Well, TBD with this offseason, obviously, but I think that's a potential big development for Keegan down the line too.
A lot of the listeners might be thinking that this is kind of complicated, and I bring that up because we're summing it up as best as we possibly can. There are much smarter basketball people in the Kings organization that are making this even easier to understand, or that add another level to this that even we are trying to comprehend. That being said, I feel like what has gone so well for Sacramento over these past 2 games is Mike has simplified things a ton. He's focused back on a pillar of his offense, which is the paint touches and spray threes, which has opened up the offense again. The Kings are knocking down shots again at the rate we expect them to with the amount of shooters they have. And then defensively, something as simple as high 5 closeouts for 3-point shots, which is a fundamental defensive practice that you learn in high school, if not earlier, right? Just basically how to close out effectively against a 3-point shot. Mike and the Kings have re-emphasized that in practice. That's not inside scoop. Mike has told us this. They're re-emphasizing it. And over these past 2 games, the closeouts have been better than we've seen pretty much all season. Yes, teams still have to miss, but I think just putting it in a shooter's mind that there is going to be anywhere between a 6-foot to a 6'9" guy that's running at you full speed to kind of close out and contest, even if it's an open shot, that mentally kind of throws you off a little bit. Teams seem to always come into the Golden One Center and shoot well against Sacramento. That hasn't been the case these last 2 games, and what I can point to is the Kings are fundamentally closing out differently and simplifying things, and they're winning basketball games because of it.
Yeah, players love shooting in Golden One. Anthony Edwards has talked about it. There was a practice earlier this year when Indiana came into town and kind of waiting for Tyrese, and I overhear Jarris Walker, Indiana's rookie, being like, man, I just love this gym. I'm like, gosh, what is it? I don't know if it's sight lines or what it is. It probably helps that teams come in knowing that the Kings allow the highest 3-point percentage.
That'll help.
Like you mentioned, it's different when you know that pressure is going to be there, right? And hopefully these last few games are a trend in the right direction. The Lakers still made a lot of triples. A lot of that was Austin Reeves, specifically in that first quarter. But the Milwaukee game was maybe some of their best closeouts as well. And they're finding the balance of defending the paint and the 3-point line, like managing to do both against 2 teams that were really succeeding offensively post All-Star break in Milwaukee and the Lakers. I think were really impressive performances, and a lot of that has to do with physicality. There's the closeouts as well that you mentioned, to the point where they're drilling these tiny details that I think typically wouldn't happen necessarily on most NBA teams, but they're just trying to make sure that they clean that up, since it's very clearly a weakness for them. And that physicality I mentioned is a big part as well, and definitely will be against the Knicks. I kind of asked Mike Brown about it today because they fouled a lot these last 2 games, the Kings, but successful defensive performances while doing that. And Mike was saying, yeah, we have to tone that down, but I'd rather start at a point where the energy level's there and we have to rein it down physicality-wise, compared to trying to create it when it doesn't even, there's not a baseline to work with.
Do they have to tone it down, or do officials just have to get used to that as how the Sacramento Kings are going to try and play? Because if the trade-off is the Kings are playing this physical and active defense for the rest of this season, but they're sending teams to the foul line as much as they have the Lakers and Bucks, which, by the way, it's Giannis and LeBron. They're going to get to the line anyway. But if that's the trade-off, then I'll make that trade until those free throws really start to kill you. And at some point they will. If you're having like a 33-12 free throw advantage for the other team, at some point you're going to lose a game because of that. Thankfully, it hasn't happened over these 2 games, but I'm with you. I'd much rather dial it back, set the tone physical and dial it back than try and ramp up out of the fear of getting into foul trouble. And I also think, like, De'Aaron Fox pointed this out after the Lakers game. Like, when the Kings are playing physical, refs are quick to whistle. But teams are playing physical against Sacramento. God forbid, like, Domantas Sabonis gets hit in the face every single game. Now, he initiates a lot of contact, so that's why officials kind of expect it and maybe let it go. But I think also the officials have to get used to, okay, the Kings are going to consistently try and play a physical brand of defense. Now we're not going to call every ticky-tack foul because we know this is how they're establishing it. I think it almost takes like a De'Aaron or a captain before the game going up to the officials and going, yo, like, we're playing physical tonight. Just you call a foul what you think is a foul, but just letting you know, like, we're intentionally trying to play this way, so you don't have to be so ticky-tack.
Yeah, and I think it'll show in the postseason for sure. I think that's one of the things they really learned in the playoffs last year is that, dang, we can get away with a lot when it comes to fouls.
That was a physical series.
Absolutely. So I think that they are just like working up towards the postseason, and I think that's been a lot of this year. But there have definitely been some comments about the refs today as well for Mike. But you mentioned, like, De'Aaron said that, they can say they're not whistling it any different, but they clearly are. He said we could sit here and lie all day if we want.
Yeah, he basically said if you say they're not doing it, you're a liar.
Right.
Like, all right, Fox.
And Chris Watkins pointed out to me the other day that, like, the free throw numbers post All-Star break are down significantly. I think I could have these numbers slightly wrong, but it's something like 45 attempts on average in the league per game pre-All-Star, and down to like 40 post. And then there's the De'Aaron comments, and today at practice, coach says, I asked him about the physicality, and he said something along the lines of, like, we'd like the same whistle. And, I'm not going to go tweet those out because I'm not trying to get anybody fined, but there's definitely an aspect of that going on here. And, I think it's just little stuff of, yes, the refs will get more used to this level of physicality. I think of Minnesota last year. They're a team that fouled a lot and just junked up the game. They tried everything they could with a subpar defensive roster to just throw off the other rhythm, whether that meant being physical, and if that means you're getting sent to the line more than the league average, then so be it. So I do think that is kind of how Sacramento's approaching it, but it's little things of, like I mentioned with Keon, just pull your hands back at the last moment. The little bits of physicality. Alex Len gets called for a lot of moving screens. So I think little things like that could definitely be cleaned up and would help.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match as well. Robinhood Gold, gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees do apply. And now for some legal info. The claim is as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer.
Maybe the most important question. It's good that we're saving it for the end, Brenden. Why should Kings fans, hell, even Kings media members? I have a good feeling about the New York Knicks game because that's a playoff team, a physical team. You're at home. Why should Kings fans feel confident that the way that the Kings have been playing over these last couple of games will carry into Memphis, Toronto, Washington? Why should we believe that the Kings will not continue to do what they've been doing, which is playing up against the Bucks and the Lakers in these big games, but when it's these very winnable games, whether it's at home or on the road, they just aren't the same team?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could give people some confidence,
Nobody
but
knows.
I'm not very sure either. It's funny. I got asked earlier this morning about, like, if they win this Knicks game, are you going to feel good? I'm like, as crazy as it sounds, I'm kind of waiting for the Memphis game.
I agree.
To see how
100%.
this goes. And even after last game, after that Lakers win, Harrison Barnes got asked, like, do you feel like you guys have kind of turned a corner here? And he was pretty quick to be like, actually, I feel like we've played well against good teams all year. I don't really feel like that's been our issue, And he did acknowledge the back-to-back thing. I think they started 0-4 on second nights. I want to say they're 5-1, I believe, at this point. So definitely bounce back from that tough start. But, yeah, I mean, I think that there definitely is an aspect of we don't know what we're going to get. And I'd like to say that this is it is a good back-to-back. It's probably their most impressive 2 straight games in a year, and more often than not, I think when they had given up less than 100 points, they'd conceded 116 on average the night after.
Right.
Did pretty well against the Lakers 2 nights in a row. So I'm optimistic, but I can't help but be like, gosh, are they just going to go back to the same team?
I think
We've seen this.
That's where we're all at.
Yeah.
That's where we're all at, and we've seen it enough, especially this season, but really over the last 2 seasons, hell, over the last 20 years, we've seen it with this Kings team, regardless of who's playing and who's coaching. there's a very, very, very fine line between taking your opponents lightly or not being serious and understanding that you are the better team and you should be winning this game. I think the significance of if the Kings handle these upcoming games, the Grizzly game, the Washington game, I think Toronto still is a tough matchup even without Pascal. And every single team is an NBA team, so they're going to give you challenges. But there are opportunities here not only to pick up needed wins in this playoff race against weak Eastern Conference opponents. There are chances to where if you play the right way, Brenden, it's a short night for your main guys. We're talking fourth quarters off for a lot of these guys. I mean, it's been awesome to see Darvin Ham wave the white flag with like a minute and a half left. Doc Rivers waved the white flag with the Bucks with like 6.5 minutes left.
Yeah.
And Mike kept his guys out there like, Mike, shut him down.
Right.
You don't have to do this anymore. I think there's value here to handle your business and get your guys just a little bit extra rest so that they can go deep into the tank for hopefully a playoff run.
Yeah, and I think a big aspect of that is closing the first half right and starting the second well. It's something they did really well in that Milwaukee and LA games. Third quarters were phenomenal.
Yeah.
I want to say the Lakers had 21 points. Milwaukee got held to 17. So that's an area they've struggled a lot in not only this season, but years prior. You can think back to the Kings just getting totally smacked in the third quarter. De'Aaron mentioned it, in the years that he's been here, they have not been very good in that quarter. But I think that that's the big aspect because teams are going to go on runs. That's the nature of the NBA. It doesn't matter who you're up against. Washington, Kyle Kuzma could make 2 threes, and then Corey Kispert hits one right after, right. And all of a sudden there's a big swing.
Sure.
So anybody can go on runs in the NBA. It's about limiting them, though, and not letting them extend to an entire quarter. And putting your foot on their neck when you really have that lead.
Right.
And I think that we've seen the Kings do that better. But if you can take care of those third quarters after you already have a good first half, specifically end of the second half, last 2 minutes or so, and the start of the third, that could help you, build up that lead to where guys can't get rest in the fourth quarter, which will be important because you need everybody healthy down the stretch.
I'll sneak this question in before we wrap up, too. This is going to be a conversation that we're going to be having a lot at the end of the season. It's going to be a major topic of conversation in postseason press conferences, whenever that may be. Hopefully it's after the Kings are hoisting a championship. We can all believe, or we can all hope. But
see you at the parade.
Yeah, no kidding. Downtown Sacramento's ready. How, with each passing day, we're less than a month away from the end of the regular season. We're getting closer and closer and closer to the crossroads of Malik Monk as a free agent.
Mm-hmm.
The more I watch Malik, and I felt this way for a while, but every single game Malik plays, even the games where he struggles and is a little bit chaotic and goes a little bit crazy, like, I don't know how the Kings can possibly replace him. Like, they have to do, in my opinion, something completely different if they lose him. Again, conversation for another time, but we're kind of scratching the surface here. What is your feeling or just vibe on this Kings team and how all in they're going to have to go to make sure bringing Malik back is number one priority?
I mean, they don't have really many options is the thing. I believe it's a 4-year, $78 million deal that they could offer. Now, if Malik was willing to bet on himself and take a 1-year deal, which I think would start around the 17 mil mark, then next year they could have his full bird rights and then go crazy with how much they want to offer him.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if Malik wanted to do that. Malik's talked about how he was almost out of the league previously, obviously complications in Charlotte.
Yep.
And earlier in the year, there was a lot of compliments about Malik's work ethic specifically this year.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, that's
Gone.
got to be part of a contract year.
Sure.
And I'm sure that guys work ridiculously hard in contract years.
Yep.
And I would imagine there's a mental aspect of, do I really want to do that again?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hesitant about the 1-year idea, but I think that range is fine for Malik. It's just, will Orlando is the one that I really worry about.
Yep.
Come in, they have upwards of, I believe, $30 million in cap space and offer 23 to Malik in a starting spot. And does he care about starting? It's a big conversation. I don't really know. Personally, I think closing games is more important. Maybe that if he wins 6th Man of the Year, which he seems on track to, that could help, encourage him that maybe this coming off the bench thing isn't so bad. Did Lou Will and Jamal Williams or Jamal Crawford make it cool? Maybe. Malik seems to fit in that mold. But let me ask you, if you're Orlando and you're looking to throw $22 million at a guard, right? Just hypothetical here. Mm-hmm. And you have Klay Thompson, DeMar DeRozan, D'Angelo Russell and Malik Monk. Who intrigues you the most?
It's D'Angelo Russell, and I think D'Lo and Malik Monk are the top two, and they have to be the top two, specifically because I think that team's need for a primary ball handler, which Malik has shown that he's capable of being that. Like Malik here in Sacramento, I think has opened everybody's eyes up to he's not necessarily a traditional point guard, but he's a playmaker.
Yeah,
and he's
he can
a floor
do it.
general. And that, I think, is what Orlando is missing. Plus, we have seen firsthand how good of a two-man game Malik can run with basically any big in the league. Imagine a Malik Monk, Paolo Banchero, or a Malik Monk, Franz Wagner two-man game.
Right.
Forget about it. Like,
Yeah.
you're in good shape.
And,
So if I'm
they have good defense to go around them, you know. San Antonio's the other team I worry about a little bit, but I think last time I checked their number, they only can get up to about 20. And I don't know that, you know, a couple more million a year is necessarily going to pull Malik away, but there's the drive of Victor Wembanyama and Pop, so there's going to be some situations, but luckily not many teams have the money that can really go and take him away, and they might decide to go in other directions.
Yeah, you got to exploit the Fox-Monk relationship. You got to exploit the Brown-Monk relationship.
I think that's the bigger one to me, weirdly. Like,
Brown-Monk?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like the term best friend gets thrown around a lot for Fox and Malik, and I get a little uncomfortable with that just because I don't feel like we really know. You know, I know obviously these guys spent college together. They have a lot of on-court chemistry that's really obvious.
Right.
But I don't feel like we've ever gotten much transparency on like their off-court relationship, and so I just question if that could be overblown a bit. But I think we've definitely seen the relationship that he has with Mike and how that's beneficial to both of them. They're both guys that tell you like it is. They're going to tell it to your face. Maybe not be the nicest with how they do it every time, but know that they're coming from the same spot and neither are going to take it personally. So I do wonder if how much that relationship will play a part here.
Well, I think if the bag is what Malik wants, I think that's what Malik should chase, even if it means he's not a Sacramento King. And I think like circumstances can change, but at this point, it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where I am upset at Malik Monk for taking $22 million from Orlando versus the 17.5 or whatever that he can take from the Sacramento Kings. If that's his motivation, like his journey in the NBA, like go and get that. And I think everybody in Sacramento on the team would understand that just as much as hopefully the fans would. So I have a hard time right now saying that I would be upset at Malik for leaving the Sacramento Kings. I'd be more upset at the Sacramento Kings for now being put in a really difficult spot you just lost your third best player, arguably your second most important player at times with how he plays off the bench, and you don't have a lot of assets to figure out how to replace that or move on from that. So like Malik has all the power in this situation. I'm sure that's a welcome sight for him. And I just, it's a conversation for another day. I'm going to enjoy the rest of the season and the playoffs with him here. But as soon as we get to those summer months, man, it's going to be cold sweats every day thinking about the possibility of Malik being gone. It's
going to be tough. Like you said, replacing him is would be a tall task. I guess you have that MLE to work with and try to figure something out, but it's definitely an uphill battle that you would
Keon Ellis.
be in. Yeah.
Here's 30 minutes, bud.
And you know, Orlando's the one that worries me. I think the other team that I know has money is Detroit. Not worried.
No.
I'd be shocked. They'd have to bag him out like Monty Williams money, you know?
And even then, he's still second to Cade Cunningham, so it's not.
Yeah. And I want to say the other one's Utah, which doesn't really move the needle in my mind for him either. So Orlando's the one that I'm watching with San Antonio as a fringe one as well.
Back off, Magic.
Yeah,
He's
I
our
agree.
monk.
I agree.
He's ours. Well, you do an amazing job, of course, with all the different outlets that I said that you do, King's Pulse, King's Beat, Return of the Roar, all the work that you do for SacTown Sports 1140. So keep that up. Of course, coverage over there and coverage from Brenden will continue to ramp up as we get to playoffs. This will not be the last time we have you on. So thank you for doing this, my guy, and we'll see how they fare tomorrow against the Knicks.
No problem, man. Glad to do it. If any listeners want to play League of Legends with Matt and I,
That's a good
hate to
point.
throw that out there.
He got me back
Trying
into
to hit Plateau today.
He got me back into it, and it's a bad addiction.
It has not been good. It has not gone well
It's
to start.
Not at all.
No.
That's the League of Legends experience.
Reminding you why you undownloaded.
Appreciate it, Brenden.
Thanks, man.